Today, we're going to be answering three big questions. Was Wonka whimsical without Gene Wilder? Why Wonka is just whelming as a musical? And whether or not it's okay for movies to just be okay. I'm Dylan, and this is The Writer's Block. Even though there have been numerous iterations of Willy Wonka throughout the decades, I think it's safe to say that 2023's Wonka is meant to act more or less as an origin story for Gene Wilder's version of the character. Whereas 2005's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was heavily focused on bringing the original book to life, the character designs and heavy reliance on pure imagination firmly cement the new movie as a pseudo-prequel to 1971's Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. But this then begs the question, does the movie actually capture the magic of Willy Wonka? Well, to answer that, we first need to establish what made Wilder's Wonka so wonderful in the first place.
Wonderful, they called me wonderful.
Gene Wilder's performance as the confounding confectioner is considered by many to be one of the most iconic in all of cinema, and I think this is due to three main factors. The first and most obvious is that Willy Wonka is whimsical. Watching the character on screen excites the imagination of the viewer and makes them feel like anything is possible. Seeing all the edible inventions and candy-making contraptions in his factory fills the viewer with the same kind of wonder that surrounds a figure like Santa Claus.
Papa Gijo!
I know plenty of people who view this film as a comfort movie, and it's not hard to see why. Willy Wonka wants everyone, regardless of their age, to abandon cynicism and embrace sincerity. He sees magic and whimsy where others don't, which is why he hopes that we will join him in his world of pure imagination. One of my favorite lines from that song is,
"If you want to view paradise, simply look around and view it."
Wonka isn't asking us to leave behind the real world, he's simply teaching us how to find whimsy in what would otherwise be mundane. In the literal sense, he gives Charlie the opportunity to escape his mundane life, and in the figurative sense, he does the exact same thing for the audience. The movie oozes with childlike innocence, but it never goes so far as to condescend children, which leads me to factor number two. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is one of those movies that isn't scared of being scary.
Is it raining? Is it snowing?
Obviously, everyone's go-to example is the tunnel scene,
Not a speck of light is showing, so the danger must be growing.
but the scares begin long before Charlie makes it to Wonka's factory.
And don't forget the name. Everlasting Gobstopper.
Charlie's encounter with Slugworth is a huge part of why I took Stranger Danger so seriously as a kid.
I congratulate you, little boy. Well done.
If you've seen my video on the Puss in Boots sequel, you know I think it's important to expose children to negative emotions through fiction. It allows them to confront their fears in a safe manner, rather than being caught unprepared by the horrors of real life. Children are more capable than adults give them credit for, which is why it's so important for kids' movies to not be condescending, and Willy Wonka nails this, both as a movie and within the narrative. Aside from the tunnel sequence, most of the horrific things that happen within the factory are caused by the children rather than Wonka.
I don't care.
Oh, I wouldn't do that. I really wouldn't.
Wonka gives the children and their parents plenty of freedom and agency. Sure, his factory might not meet OSHA regulations,
Oh, it's too late.
Too late.
He's had it now. The suction's got him.
but any misfortune that befalls the character is ultimately of their own design.
Don't just stand there. Do something.
Help. Police. Murder.
Seeing a boy trapped in a TV, or a girl morph into a blueberry, might be scary, but it hammers home the message that your actions have consequences, even as a child. Additionally, it shows kids that their parent or guardian isn't inherently a good influence, which is an unsettling but important realization. Many children view parental figures as infallible, but they make bad choices too. The parents in Willy Wonka constantly enable the bad behavior that leads to their children's downfall.
How much do you want for the golden goose?
They're not for sale.
Name the price.
She can't have one.
Who says I can't?
Even Grandpa Joe encourages Charlie to taste the fizzy lifting drink and sell the gobstopper to Slugworth.
Slugworth wants a Gobstopper, he'll get one.
Relying on yourself rather than the people who raised you can be terrifying. That freedom and responsibility isolates the children and makes the factory feel like Pleasure Island or the Hotel California.
You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
In real life, the Darwin-esque crucible these children undergo would obviously be inexcusable, but as a work of fiction, it teaches Charlie and the audience a multitude of important lessons. If Wonka made his factory a safer space, he might be a better person, but his story would be much less poignant and far less iconic.
Where's she gone?
Where all the other bad eggs go. Down the garbage chute.
The final element that makes Wilder's Wonka so amazing is the fact that he's kind of a huckster. Sure, the products that he sells seem to be pretty legitimate, but he's also selling a persona, and that's where things get more murky.
It's all in which label is able to persist.
He'll be saint-like in one moment and almost satanic in the next, and it makes you question which one is the real Wonka.
I'm sorry, but all questions must be submitted in writing.
Does he actually care about the children's safety, or does he actually delight in their misfortune? Is his relaxed attitude because he knows everything is secretly under control?
He's completely unharmed.
You call that unharmed?
Or is he making up everything as he goes along? Is the whole mythos of Wonka a load of BS? And if it is, does it really matter? This might sound weird, but one of the characters I think is most similar to Gene Wilder as Wonka is Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow. Captain Depp as Jack Sparrow. Their backstories are both shrouded in mystery, they're both morally just but chaotic individuals, and even if they're not as in control as they might want you to believe, things tend to work out in their favor anyway.
Do you think he plans it all out? Or just makes it up as he goes along?
They also both have iconic intros that make you completely second guess every assumption you might make about them. If we were able to get a better read on Wonka, he would instantly become less interesting. It's the fact that he constantly keeps everyone else on their toes that makes him so fascinating. This, however, is exactly why both characters function better in a supporting role than as the leads in their own narrative, which means that it's finally time to talk about Wonka and Timothée Chalamet.
Lead them to paradise.
In terms of whimsy per cubic inch, Chalamet's version of Wonka is off the charts.
And unbeatable!
In fact, I would go so far as to classify him as a quirked up white boy.
How do you like it? Dark, white, nutty, absolutely insane?
His energy and charm are what make the new movie watchable, and his star power is undeniable. It's hard not to have a smile on your face whenever he's on screen. But with that being said, Chalamet is whimsical in a way that doesn't feel like Wonka. The precision and intensity of his comedic performance makes it feel like he belongs in a Wes Anderson movie rather than a Roald Dahl adaptation. They really lean into the idea of him being a magician.
You see, I'm something of a magician.
Which is admittedly very whimsical, but that's not where the magic is supposed to come from. Willy Wonka isn't an illusionist, he's an artist. The magic of his chocolate factory and the products it produces aren't smoke and mirrors. They legitimately work. Fizzy lifting drinks make you defy the laws of gravity. The 4-course gum works as advertised, even if it has some malfunctions. And of course,
The snozberries taste like snozberries.
however, even though the products in Wonka work as advertised, the movie doesn't focus on this outside of the musical numbers. Rather than an illusionist, Wonka should be a showman. In a movie like The Greatest Showman, we see Barnum exhibit the same showmanship in dialogue that we do in the musical numbers.
You will sing in the grandest theater with the finest orchestra in the greatest city on earth.
The thing that makes him unique as a character is clearly defined and consistently on display. Likewise, in The Music Man, the main character's defining trait is that he's a con man. Whether it's manipulating a whole town or rizzing up a librarian, everything he does revolves around that core piece of his personality. But Wonka just doesn't really seem to be certain what makes Wonka Wonka.
This time for Africa.
Ultimately, I really enjoy Chalamet's performance, but the character feels all over the place, and never really convinced me that this guy could become this guy. Even if they're not going for the Gene Wilder interpretation, it feels like they're throwing random whimsy at the wall and seeing what sticks, which winds up making Willy a weak protagonist. When it comes to being scary, the new movie kind of just abandons this aspect entirely, both when it comes to Wonka himself and with regards to the movie overall. The movie wants everyone to like Chalamet, so it doesn't give him a chance to show off any of the darker elements of Wonka. I get why they did this, but it really strips the character of his complexity. Additionally, the main villains are over-the-top goofballs.
We paid her to poison them.
Yes, thank you, Gerald.
You're welcome.
And the side antagonists are too cartoonish to be legitimately frightening. I'm not saying that Wonka needed to terrify its audience, but the complete lack of fear throughout the runtime makes the movie feel hollow. In Mary Poppins, the lead character is kind of intimidating at first, but that makes it feel more special when the children develop a relationship with her. The Bankers were legitimately scary, but that made it more poignant when Mr. Banks finally sided with his kids. The themes and lessons of Wonka don't hit nearly as hard because they weren't challenged in a meaningful way. But we'll take a closer look at that in a little bit. Finally, does Wonka really capture the pseudo-charlatan? Man, that's hard to pronounce, and I couldn't pronounce that when I wrote it. I don't know why I left it in. Bad call. Does Wonka actually capture the pseudo-charlatan persona that made Gene Wilder's performance so memorable? I have to say that it doesn't. I don't need Chalamet's Wonka to be a liar, but he needed to be more mysterious. He reveals early on that he can't read.
You can't read, can you?
And is pretty honest and open with his companions from the moment he meets them. I think if a bigger part of the movie was about him learning to trust other people, then it would have been much easier to examine this aspect of his personality. Instead of immediately revealing that he can't read, imagine if he tried to hide that information from Noodle. He could want everyone to think he has everything under control and have to use misdirection to keep people from finding out the truth. This would evoke the mysterious side of the character while still making him sympathetic. As it stands, the main character in Wonka just feels like some guy. It's fine if the movie is meant to give us a look behind the curtain, but it also needs to establish the protagonist's public persona. Chalamet might give a great performance throughout the movie, but unfortunately, he's not Willy Wonka. But even though Wonka isn't a good Willy Wonka movie, could it still be a good movie musical? Well, before we get into discussing songs like A World of Your Own, let's look at how you can be building a world of your own. If you're a creative person looking to invent and flesh out a world of your own, then you gotta check out the sponsor of today's video, World Anvil. Whether you're writing a story or planning a tabletop campaign, daydreaming about the setting is one of the most exciting feelings you can have. But at least for me, it can be a real struggle to turn those ideas into a reality. If you've ever had a similar problem, World Anvil is your solution. Their wiki-style article templates make it easy to develop things like lore and character breakdowns, and my favorite tools, the interactive maps and timelines, empower you to write adventures across time and space. Whether you're interested in creating trippy sci-fi universes or fascinating fantasy realms, having all your notes in one easy-to-reference world Bible gives you the freedom to focus on your storytelling. They even have tools to share and publish your stories once they're complete. World building can be hard, but thanks to World Anvil, it doesn't have to be. Click on this link in my description and enter code BLOCK to get 51% off a yearly subscription to World Anvil today.
I've got one silver sovereign in my pocket.
A Hatful of Dreams is the opening musical number, and right off the bat, this movie gets points for embracing what makes musicals so fun. If you've seen my video on Mean Girls, you know one of my biggest issues is how ashamed that movie seemed to be of its own musical numbers. But Wonka is the complete opposite. It doesn't try to make the singing diegetic or use a weird framing device to justify the music. It just opens with someone singing because that's what people do in musicals. Timothée Chalamet's voice is admittedly not that strong.
Yeah, I try. There's a lot of autotune. No, I'm kidding. But
the songs are designed around his limited vocal range, so it ends up working pretty decently. Hatful of Dreams is probably my favorite song, and it's all because of how many things it does at once. First off, it effectively communicates the wistful and optimistic tone of the movie.
Gotta work my rotten socks off if I want to make ends meet.
Wonka's aspirational attitude is infectious, and the audience can't help but want him to succeed. Secondly, it does an excellent job at establishing the setting.
And the city I've pinned 7 years of hopes on.
It simultaneously shows the best the city has to offer, as well as the less glamorous aspects of living there. It turns the architecture and the citizens into equally compelling characters, but unfortunately, they kind of get ignored for the rest of the movie. See, aside from one other musical number, the citizens of the town are largely irrelevant. Based on this song, I assumed that we'd explore how the chocolate cartel was negatively affecting their lives, and how Willy begins to improve them. But for the most part, they seem to be doing just fine without Wonka. His chocolate might help overcome shyness or grow back some of your hair, but it doesn't feel like it's important to the overall city whether or not his business is successful. To bring up the Music Man again, Harold fails to create a functioning marching band, but it doesn't matter because he changed the hearts of everyone within the town. That's what makes the story have a happy ending. But despite all that, the song functions excellently in a vacuum. It's a nearly perfect opening number that introduces the protagonist, establishes their objective and motivation, and takes the audience on a self-contained journey, all in the span of about 5 minutes. Also, I'm just a sucker for any song that has a counting mechanic.
Well, there's chocolate, and there's chocolate.
The first version of You've Never Had Chocolate Like This is kind of a mixed bag. The music feels really generic, but the lyrics excellently capture what it means to be Willy Wonka. Hearing him tell the crowd about his exotic adventures is fascinating.
In a
Jungle near Mumbai, there's a little hoverfly.
And it's legitimately fun to hear how the magic chocolate actually works.
When asked nicely, lay precisely one little egg in each of these.
In my opinion, it's much more interesting to reveal the origins of Wonka's candy than it is to reveal the origins of his character. And I really wish they had focused more on acquiring unique ingredients as a source of narrative tension. One of the cutest scenes in the movie is when Wonka has to break into the zoo with Noodle in order to obtain giraffe milk. Adding in more side quests of this nature could have provided the movie with a really fun episodic structure. I also think the movie misses an opportunity here with the crowd. Wonka tells them,
"You've never had chocolate like this."
But we never see the chocolate they've been consuming up until this point. It might sound pedantic, but it would have added a lot to see the chocolate these people normally consume. Is Slugworth's chocolate boring? Is it pretentious? Is it even good? Or is it just the only thing available? Later on, the bad guys mention,
"He only charges a sovereign a chocolate, so anyone can afford them, even the
poor."
But we never really explore this outside of Noodle.
What? You've never had chocolate?
Still no.
Once again, this would be a great opportunity to include the city folk and strengthen the message of the movie. Have their lives been dull and mundane? Are they unable to imagine a better way? Maybe Wonka needs to show them how to live.
In a world of pure imagination.
But no. That song is just a cheap nostalgia play, and the city folk have no purpose besides acting as backup dancers. It's just frustrating because Beauty and the Beast shows us that you can simultaneously use the ensemble to enhance the music as well as the central themes.
We don't like what we don't understand. In fact, it scares us, and this monster is mysterious.
It might sound like a nitpick, but the misuse of these background characters points to an overall lack of thematic cohesion throughout the movie. Speaking of which, the next song has the same problem.
First you pick up the apparel and you stick it in a barrel, scrub, scrub.
Musically, there's not much to complain about when it comes to Scrub Scrub. I'm a big fan of shanties and work songs, and despite being monotonous, the song does manage to get stuck in your head. Lyrically, it does a good job showing how miserable everyone is and how they can't imagine ever escaping indentured servitude. That being said, why the heck is there a subplot about indentured servitude in this movie? The movie acknowledges that poor people exist, but it doesn't have anything to say about poverty. If the movie really wanted to make a statement about how the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor, I could understand why debt would be a factor in the narrative. But as it stands, you could easily remove this whole subplot. As far as antagonists go, the Scrubbits don't add any additional stakes.
Really?
Regardless of if Wonka's indebted to them or not, the chocolate cartel and its police force are still the thing preventing him from selling chocolate. He could be a trust fund baby staying in a 5-star hotel, and the main plot would still play out exactly the same. Sure, he might not meet the side characters, but they also don't add anything to the story. Noodle is the one who teaches him to read, but the only reason he can't read is because they needed something for Noodle to do. Their relationship doesn't add anything meaningful to the narrative, and the implication is that they just go their separate ways at the end of the movie.
Have you got a sweet tooth?
I do.
Dear viewer, I hope you believe me when I tell you that these next two elements are both equally true. First, Sweet Tooth is a musical number that I legitimately wanted to love. Secondly, Sweet Tooth is a musical number that encapsulates everything wrong with Wonka. The music starts off pretty strong, with the whole song feeling like an homage to Everybody Ought to Have a Maid.
Everybody ought to have a maid. Everybody ought to have a maid. Everybody ought to have a working girl.
But therein lies the problem. In Everybody Ought to Have a Maid, the music continuously builds in a comedic and satisfying manner. Each verse adds an additional participant, and each time the music repeats, the song is sung with more and more energy. The first two verses of Sweet Tooth are practically identical.
But think about your sweet tooth.
I do.
And even when they hype up verse 3 as the big finish, they can't seem to go more than 2 lines without reducing the energy to a whisper.
Have you got a sweet tooth? Me too.
It's amazing what a tailor can conceal.
This issue is also representative of the soundtrack in its entirety. If you take any one song from Wonka, It'll probably sound fun and unique, but when listening to them in context, you realize just how similar every one of these songs sound. They're pretty much all mid-tempo numbers that hardly build or develop throughout the multiple verses. I think a big part of this is that no one in the main cast is a real singer, so it's physically impossible for them to do anything particularly interesting with the music. Like, I don't need Chalamet to be doing love on top level key changes, but it would at least be nice if there was more variation from one song to the next. It's kind of like listening to an album from that one artist, where their singles are good, but every other song on their album just sounds like a generic version of those singles. I'm not gonna say who I'm talking about, so people don't get angry at me, but you can figure it out.
What's that supposed to mean? Well, I know what it means. Actually, what does it mean?
Another issue is the trio of villains. First of all, making Slugworth the bad guy totally misses the point of the original movie. Slugworth was just a test to see if Charlie was morally righteous enough to take over the factory. He might be a narc, but Slugworth is still Wonka's ally. Also, the chocolate cartel doesn't feel like it's properly utilized in the movie. They seem to be in control of the entire city, but that isn't shown to be an issue for anyone other than the main characters. Honestly, most of the people in the city seem to have pretty decent lives. Next up in reasons why Sweet Tooth is awful, body shaming. Now, everyone gets to decide for themselves what they personally consider offensive. I personally believe that no subject should be off limits when it comes to comedy, but I also believe that if you're making an offensive joke, it darn well better be a good one. So, for the sake of fairness, let's see what kind of fat joke Wonka thinks is worth making in the year 2023.
Car struck. I'm sure it did.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like the entire joke here is just that Keegan-Michael Key is wearing a fat suit. I'm no comedian myself, but I feel confident in saying that if your whole punchline is just that an obese person exists, you're bad at writing comedy. On a less serious note, let's talk about police corruption. Like indentured servitude, this is an incredibly strange subplot to have in a movie about Willy Wonka.
Make sure they're all frisked.
It's a persistent part of the narrative, but the movie never explores it in a meaningful way. Removing it from the story would not only make the conflict more focused, but also force the writers to flesh out the main antagonists. This also speaks to a larger issue with the overall concept of Wonka's plot. When doing reboots, origin stories, and anything else with pre-existing IP, the central conceit of your story should be tailored around the things that make your characters special. Otherwise, it just feels like you shoved a beloved character in a story that was never meant for them. A great example of bad character narrative fit is 2021's Cruella. Cruella de Vil is one of Disney's most iconic villains, and her two defining character traits are that she's kind of extra, and she really wants to murder your dog. So naturally, they decided to make her a good guy, and stuck her in a fashion, rivalry, heist thriller period piece. Oh, and her hatred for Dalmatians? Yeah, that's because Emma Thompson used guard dogs to murder Cruella's mom. But even then, Cruella forgives the Dalmatians by the end of the movie. So this origin story is actually the origin story of a completely different character. The plot of Cruella would have worked much better as a prequel to The Devil Wears Prada than as a narrative about the villain from 101 Dalmatians. The character was shoehorned into this narrative solely for the name recognition, but she lost everything that made her special in the process. Conversely, 2017's Power Rangers is an excellent example of how to design a plot around your central characters. For those of you who don't know, the three most iconic elements of the Power Rangers TV show are dope armor that comes in 3 to 7 different colors, using the power of teamwork, and fighting ridiculous bad guys.
It's a Krispy Kreme.
Krispy Kreme. This is a special place.
Very special.
That's why seasons of the show can be so wildly different. They might be time cops trying to figure out a way to get back to the future, or first responders fighting literal demons from hell. But if you capitalize on those three main elements, it's gonna feel like Power Rangers. In the 2017 movie, after discovering an alien ship and its strange powers, 5 kids who couldn't be more different have to learn to work together in order to stop Rita Repulsa from destroying the planet. The only problem is, they can't unlock their powers until they open up to one another and overcome their differences.
Have any of you morphed before?
Yes, but only in the shower.
Both the physical and emotional stakes are directly tied to the elements that define the franchise.
You must shed your masks to wear this armor.
Which is just good screenwriting. If Power Rangers of all things can do it, why not Wonka? Who thought cartels, police corruption, and indentured servitude were good plot points for a movie about Willy Wonka? Like, sure, they're a chocolate cartel, but aside from using chocolate as currency, we never see them doing any actual chocolate making. They should function as rivals to Willy Wonka, and we should see how their chocolate business works normally, separate from all their shady practices. The movie winds up becoming a heist film in Act 3, and by the time we get there, I was legitimately frustrated that this wasn't the focus all along. If the whole movie was about breaking into the chocolate vault and seeing how Wonka has to use his different candies as cool gadgets, the movie would at least feel justified in using the character. But this whole story feels like a waste of the Willy Wonka IP. Just make him a generic chocolatier if you're not interested in utilizing the unique aspects of Wonka. Sorry, I feel like I got off track for a moment. Speaking of which,
For a moment.
The song between Wonka and Noodle is cute, but I don't feel like it's supported by the rest of the narrative. The lyrics explore the positive effect Wonka has had on Noodle's life,
I kind of forgot to be sad.
and how scared she is of opening herself up to hope.
Never let down your guard for a moment.
But I have a few problems with this. Not only is this suddenly serious tone way out of whack with the vibe of this movie, but this isn't an arc that the rest of the runtime really explores. Willy briefly calls her out for being pessimistic on account of her orphan syndrome.
That's just your orphan syndrome talking.
My what?
But we really don't see her being closed off in any meaningful way. There isn't even a beat at the Act 2 low point where she seems hurt that Wonka left without saying goodbye. The song would be perfect if the movie followed through on this aspect of her character, but Wonka is focused on police corruption, not character arcs. It might have been written with a previous draft in mind, or based off the filmmakers telling the songwriter what they thought the story was going to be about, but either way, it just feels out of place. The other issue has to do with the complexity of the song. It's intentionally written to be simple and feel almost like a nursery rhyme.
Noodle, noodle, apple strudel.
And it definitely accomplishes this goal in a vacuum. The problem is, the rest of the soundtrack isn't all that complex, so this song doesn't achieve its intended effect.
Singing this song will improve your moodle.
In Hamilton, Dear Theodosia is so lovely because after countless lyrically dense, high-energy numbers, a relatively simple lullaby is a great change of pace. Out of context, For a Moment is probably tied for my favorite song. As I write and edit this video, it's definitely the one I find myself humming most frequently. But in context, the song draws unnecessary attention to some of the film's biggest issues, and while we're discussing big things,
In Lumperland, I am regarded as something of a whopper.
I'll be honest, the inclusion of Hugh Grant's Oompa Loompa character has me deeply conflicted. Objectively, the character serves no meaningful purpose in the narrative, he just shows up randomly throughout the runtime before saving the day like a deus ex machina. He's a superfluous side character that wouldn't have been included if Oompa Loompas weren't nostalgic iconography from the original movie. That being said, Hugh Grant as Lofty is the best thing this movie has to offer.
Oh, I don't think I want to hear that.
Too late. I've started dancing now.
Grant was born to play a grumpy little man, and the few sequences we get with him are some of the funniest in the movie. Remember when I say that the movie would be better as a heist film? Well, what if the only way Wonka and Lofty could make things up to the other Oompa Loompas was breaking into the cartel's chocolate vault? This would make the narrative a more meaningful origin story, as well as tie in more directly with Wonka iconography. It would be way more focused than the plot we currently have, and would give the side characters an opportunity to provide more utility. I just realized that I completely forgot about the reprise of You've Never Had Chocolate Like This, but I like my previous segue too much to fix the order.
Have you ever had chocolate like this?
The reprise serves as a midpoint montage and is arguably the most complex song from a musical standpoint. Structuring the number around different character vignettes allows there to be more variety in the vocals.
I should call it quits.
I've never had chocolate like this.
And the energy steadily builds to a big finish. From a storytelling perspective, the song moves the plot forward quite efficiently. We're shown how Wonka's candy improves people's lives.
Just eat a few of these and you'll be feeling 10 feet tall.
We see how the bad guys are reacting to Wonka's success.
If we don't get on top of this, we'll go bust.
Chocopocalypse!
And we even develop the pointless subplot of Willy not being able to read.
Well, that's a valid and that's a consonant.
What's that now? You're talking nonsense.
At this point, it seems to me like the songs consistently have a better understanding of the story than the screenplay does. On a positive note, this number does an excellent job playing into the strengths of a movie musical. The camera work feels like it's part of the choreography, and the editing allows us to enjoy a vast array of people and locations. The dancing is energetic, and the whole sequence feels like something we don't usually get in modern cinema. There is one moment I'm not quite decided on though, and it's when Wonka says,
"Just pop one in and everything becomes a Broadway show."
He does this little thing with his hands, and I can't make up my mind whether it's quirky and endearing, or just plain weird. If any of you watching want to weigh in on this matter, that would be much appreciated.
A world of your own.
A World of Your Own starts off really strong with a tender intro, and admittedly has a catchy chorus, though I can't help but feel like it doesn't go anywhere. The song is yet another plodding, mid-tempo bit of music, and when they get to the final verse, they literally cut to some of the cast singing with less energy than a middle school matinee.
A place to escape to.
By this point in the musical, I was really hoping they'd shake things up stylistically, but it seems like they're dead set on monotony. Visually, however, this sequence is stunning. The candy shop nails the Wonka whimsy that has been lacking up until this point, and I sincerely hope the set designers get nominated for something. It does make it that much more frustrating to see the shop burn down less than 10 minutes after its introduction. I get that the gang needs to face a setback, but then open the shop earlier in the film. After all, this kind of magic is what people want to see in a Wonka movie. Now, since the song's title is a reference to Willy's mom,
We lived on the river, just the two of us, in a perfect little world of our own.
I think now is a good time to discuss how she's used throughout the film. The story tries to make her the center of Wonka's character arc and the central theme of the movie, but unfortunately, this movie is just bad at developing its own theme.
Every good thing in this world started with a dream.
Normally, the best way to explore themes in a screenplay is want versus need. A character starts off with a goal,
I'm already on a quest to get my swamp back.
And usually holds a misguided belief.
They judge me before they even know me. That's why I'm better off alone.
But after learning an important lesson,
you're so wrapped up in layers, onion boy, you're afraid of your own feelings.
They wind up getting what they actually needed all along.
But I don't understand. I'm supposed to be beautiful.
But you are beautiful.
According to the movie, and his mom, Wonka's want is to make the world's best chocolate, but his need is to appreciate the people he's sharing that chocolate with. The issue here is that Wonka seems to appreciate everyone from the start of the movie. When he sees the message from his mother, it doesn't change him in any meaningful way. A movie like The Greatest Showman once again shows us how they should have handled this type of character arc. In that movie, Hugh Jackman's want is to provide a great life for his family.
This isn't the life I promised you.
His need, however, is to stop trying to win other people's approval and just appreciate what he has right in front of him.
You don't need everyone to love you, Finn. Just a few good people.
Barnum's central character flaw is unchecked ambition. All the success, all the money, all the fame, it will never be enough for him. Luckily, after everything blows up in his face, he finally understands that his family is all he ever needed.
It's everything you ever want. It's everything you ever need. And it's here, right in front of you.
In Wonka's case, the only thing holding him back from an arc like this is a character flaw. If the script leaned into his obsession, not only would it evoke the crazed genius of Gene Wilder, but it would allow his character to actually change over the course of the movie. Even a good performance can't fix a poorly written character.
Sorry, Noodle.
If the movie were willing to show that Noodle feels betrayed and thinks that Willy abandoned her, this song would work decently, but they didn't even manage to do that. Do you know how simple it would have been to fix this? Right after Wonka sets sail on the boat, cut over to the scene where Noodle finds out that he's gone. Then have the character respond emotionally to this news before she gets locked up. Then, cut back to the assassination attempt before cutting back the next day when Wonka is revealed to be alive and rescues Noodle. Wonka can apologize, and Noodle can say something like, "I wasn't mad at you, I was just sad that you left." Once again, the lyrics hint at elements of the character that the script fails to capitalize on.
I just wanted it to feel the way that it did when I was a kid.
If the writing had made Wonka exhibit a bit of Peter Pan syndrome, it could have made his relationship with Noodle and the other characters more complex. He could be obsessed with recreating his childhood at first, then learns to accept the loss of his mother and take solace in his newfound friendship. Songs like this are supposed to be emotional, but the movie is too scared to let the audience feel any negative emotion. Well, unless you're a heavier person, in which case this movie hates you and thinks you should be mocked. I'm not saying we need to get Schindler's List emotional, but moments of real sadness are what make a happy ending so cathartic.
We'll begin with a spin.
Finally, the film ends with Timothée Chalamet singing Pure Imagination, which ironically shows very little imagination on behalf of the movie. The final number in a musical should synthesize the themes and message of the story, but the lyrics aren't thematically relevant, and his friends aren't even here to see him build the factory. If you want the movie to be about the power of pure imagination, then we should see how dull and mundane everyday life is. Part of the conflict should focus on people losing hope, only for Wonka to come in and show them that if you can imagine a better tomorrow, then you can create one.
Wanna change the world, there's nothing to it.
Now, you might be thinking, Dylan, isn't that exactly what happens in the original Willy Wonka? And you'd be correct, which is the reason why the song is in that movie. The reason why the song is in this movie is because the studio wanted to exploit nostalgia. If they were dead set on shoehorning this piece of music into the narrative, then it should have just replaced A World of Your Own. Speaking of shoehorned, Hugh Grant showing back up and Wonka randomly deciding that he needs a factory feels incredibly forced. I understand they want to reveal how Willy became Wonka, but that revelation should be an important part of the narrative. If it's just supposed to be a vignette rather than an origin story, stick to your guns and don't shoehorn in details like this at the last minute. Also, because this is the only song not written with Chalamet in mind, you really start to hear the limits of his vocal range. It's not a huge deal, but it's normally best to end on a high note, and Chalamet just can't hit those. Despite how much I've criticized this movie, I want to make it clear that overall, it's fine. It's by no means terrible, and I never begrudge anyone for liking a movie I don't. All the same, I firmly believe that Wonka could have been much better than it actually was. Sometimes it's okay for a movie to just be okay, but if you're gonna reboot or revive a dormant property, then I think you should give it some more respect than just good enough. A character like Willy Wonka should have a story that feels like it was tailored to him and him alone, not like he was stamped onto a random narrative like a cheap t-shirt. We live in a time where nearly complete movies just get tossed in the garbage for tax write-offs, and beloved properties are viewed by executives as an easy way to boost quarterly earnings. And from Warner Brothers' perspective, Wonka did just that. But if you ask me, Willy deserved a little better. I'm Dylan, and this has been The Writer's Block.